Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight we are going to be talking about, do your students take risks? In this day and age, sometimes this is a problem for many students. And another question is, how well do your students handle failure, and what do they do when they fail? And finally, do they feel safe to share and trust you, that the ability for them to share inside your classroom is something that they are comfortable with doing? So tonight we're going to talk about how to build a community so that students do feel as though they are comfortable enough to take risks in your classroom, they're comfortable enough to fail, and understand that your place is a safe place for them to experience failure and know that they can rebound from that. They feel that they can share their ideas, that it's safe to do so, and that they can trust you and their classmates. And building a community to do this is a great way, and it definitely helps to establish a foundation for inquiry that often involves students communicating with one another and sharing their ideas. So thanks for joining me for another episode. Tonight is episode 39 of the Teaching with Inquiry show, where we are live here on Monday nights at 9 o'clock. And we also have a podcast and YouTube show replay for those of you that aren't able to catch us live but want to be able to take the show on a go. And I am Patty, and I am a junior split grade teacher and have just returned back to the classroom after my maternity leave, and I am definitely happy to be back. And it certainly feels for me like it's September, and community building is definitely a focus of what is happening in my classroom right now. So a new teacher comes new opportunities to build trust and establish new and reestablish old communication patterns between myself and my students, and between my students and my students. And again, we are here every single week talking about inquiry to help make teaching with inquiry accessible, functional, and fun for both teachers and their students. Now, tonight's episode is brought to you by my Inquiry 101 course, which you can get access to by checking out www.madlylearning.com. So if you are new to inquiry or want to get a little bit of a refresher on how to use inquiry in your classroom, that is a great place to start, as it will run through for you all of the getting started and establishing things that you need to do in order to use inquiry in your classroom. So again, you can check that out on www.madlylearning.com and sign up right there on the homepage. So tonight, I wanted to talk about building a community because it certainly is a focus for myself right now in my classroom. And I think that is definitely something that we need to be cognizant of when we are using inquiry in our classroom, because you need to have students be able to share their ideas. But in order for them to share their ideas, and so that you don't hear crickets in your classroom when you ask questions or get them to do something, there needs to be an establishment of trust. And unfortunately, in this day and age, many students that come into our classroom are having a difficult time with this ability to take risks, to not be perfect, to have the ambiguous answer. So they really want to get to the right answer and do it well. They're often afraid of failure, and often maybe they are, especially when you're getting older grades and juniors, there is a lot of social risk that is involved in sharing their ideas, especially if their ideas are wrong. So building a community where it is safe and where you are helping students contract what it looks like to share within your classroom, I think is an essential skill to build up. And if you don't quite have that yet, it's never too late to start. I can do it in January, and you can join me as well and do it with me. So I think the first step is always using your parents as allies. So the biggest thing, especially when you are doing inquiry and you are allowing parents to kind of get a head start. So you want to know, if you have a culture where you are letting students fail and you are in a safe way, we're not going to fail them on assignments, that's not what I mean, but getting challenging material that maybe they might not be comfortable with, or you are wanting to build an area where students can take risks, telling parents beforehand that this is what you're doing will help them to support you in the classroom with what you're doing. So you've got to let parents know You got to kind of let them in on the secret and let them know what you're planning on doing, and give them all of the necessary background information so that when the student comes home and says, oh, I got something wrong, or they might be having anxiety or frustration, which is totally normal as this transition is happening, that the parents have the appropriate language in order to support that messaging when it comes home, and it's expected. So you want parents not to be shocked when their kids come home and they're like, oh, I got something wrong today, I didn't know what I was doing. That sometimes might get the parents back up. So if they know ahead of time that this is what you're doing and why you're doing it, it might make them a little bit more prepared to answer and anticipate those concerns and questions that their child may come home with, and understanding that this is a journey that they're going on, and that learning often means making mistakes. Now, I use failure, but you can also use mistakes as well. So the next thing that you can do to help build a community of learners is really celebrating the process that is learning. So understanding that learning is a journey, and being really explicit about growth mindset and what happens to your brain when you learn, and how learning happens inside your brain, and talking about the synapses, making connections when you join something new with something old, and making those connections. Acknowledging for students that every single one of them has a different brain and might need to do different things in order to be successful, and that you're there to support finding what it is that's going to make their brain learn the quickest as possible so that they can get that new concept, I think is really important. And celebrating not always just achieving the end, but also celebrating that journey along the way. So some of the things to do is to not mark everything right away, and instead focus really on feedback first, and getting students to the point where they're not concerned that you're going to mark things and send it home right away. And you're not expecting perfection at the beginning. I think celebrating learning is really important, and making it really explicit for your students. Another thing that's important when you are supporting building a community in your classroom is to embrace failure or embrace mistakes, depending on how you really want to use those words in your classroom. So making sure that you are explicit with your students to say we're giving them something new, that you're not expecting them to get it right away, that you are expecting them that they might not know what it is, and that's totally fine and normal. Going back to the celebrating learning and going over how the brain works and how you learn, understanding that not doing well is okay. This also means as a teacher that you need to stop rescuing them and stop being a helicopter teacher. So we always hear about helicopter teachers or helicopter parents, but there's also the idea that you're saving them from making a bad decision, because you might know what you think is going to happen at the end. So, oh, if Johnny works with Billy, they're going to be horrible partners and nothing's going to get done and it's just not going to work. So I think the valuable lesson there is, if we let Johnny and Billy be partners and nothing gets done, then they fail to complete that assignment. If they then have to explain why that didn't get done, you help them realize and come to the realization that one of the reasons that they did fail and they didn't get something done was because they struggled with working together, and really getting them to think about whether or not that was the best decision. That's a real valuable learning tool, especially when you're wanting them to be critical and reflective of what kind of environment they need to be successful in. So if we're constantly rescuing them from themselves, then they're not learning from that really beneficial piece of failure. That's often, for many of us, the biggest thing that helps us to make real jumps. If we go back, we think about what it is that we failed or what we didn't succeed at, that's probably going to be meant for many of us the thing that really was a pivotal point for us. So I think it's okay to not always rescue your students and allow them to learn from their own mistakes and learn from their own failures. Now, of course, these are going to be those small failures and the ones that don't have big risk or big stakes in them. So we're not going to let them obviously fail on assignments and tests. But if it's a matter of someone like picking a partner or maybe not getting their first draft done by the deadline, those aren't going to be make it or break type of opportunities. They are going to be learning opportunities. So it's okay if we let them fail just a little bit there. I think too, another thing that we need to do is we really need to focus on the process as opposed to the product. So we're looking at that learning journey. What is it that they're trying to do? Now, this is something that I find is really hits home for students in math. So if I'm really focusing on learning as a process and I want students to think about what it is that they need to learn, and that my goal is for them to learn how to do something, not always find the right answer. Some of the things that you can do is give them the right answer from the question at the get-go, and then having them practice that process of getting there. Then they're not always rushing to check if they got it right, but it's can they do the steps. You know, this is highlighted, I find, most often in math, and it's the easiest to demonstrate. So I think math is a great way to highlight that growth mindset, the ability to fail, to build a bit more resistance and focus on the process of learning and looking at those steps along the way, as opposed to just getting the right answer all the time and being right. Now, this is going to look a little strange, but one of the things I put up is protecting that crazy nut. Now, what I mean by this is I'm not talking about my students crazy nuts, but I am referring to a TED Talk. And the TED Talk was by Derek Sivers, and it's called How to Start a Movement. And you can find that on YouTube. Now, he goes through this TED Talk and talks about how it's not you got the one crazy nut that takes the risk. And you might have those students that they're just going to be super trusting and they're going to share their answers, and they might be the first ones to do it. And they might get something wrong. And I think as a teacher, when we have those students where they are that crazy nut, they're the risk takers, the ones that throw caution to the wind and share their ideas, regardless of what their friends or peers might say, we've got to really protect that crazy nut, because that is the person that is going to be our entry point into building the community. So if they make a mistake and your class reacts negatively to that, we need to, as teachers, step right in there and protect that person and use that as an opportunity to say, no, it is safe to share here. This is what I expect, and really reinforce the ideas and the community and what your expectations are for people sharing, and focusing again on being okay to fail. It's okay to try, and all of those other things that are really important when we're supporting students. Now, in Derek Sivers' talk, he talks about that one crazy nut is going to take risk, but you don't start creating a movement until you get people joining them. So you've got that one student that's going to take the risk and share something and make a mistake and do something that might start the discussion going. What you're looking for is not necessarily that you've got that one student that's going to jump in, but that because of that one student's bravery, he or she makes it okay for other students to do the same thing. Once you have the one crazy nut and you have a few others starting to join, then you have a movement. And that's where the community starts being built in your classroom. So when that one crazy nut of a student stands up and makes a mistake and takes a risk in your classroom, you've got to be very careful to use that as an opportunity to support them so that it inspires the others to join in and make a movement of building that community in your classroom. And I will put the link to that awesome TED Talk right in the comments when this show is over. And I suggest, I've even shown this to my students about how to make change. It's a great TED Talk, and it's very short to talk about growth mindset and creating change in your classroom. Another way that you can build a community in your classroom is to celebrate the successes of your students that are along their journey. Now, we talked before about celebrating the learning, and that's more whole group. Celebrating successes is that constant feedback loop that we're giving students where they try something and we give them that feedback and we're celebrating the successes. Point out to students when you're really proud of something that they've done. Point out for students how much they've learned, when they struggled and now they're not struggling. Make that very explicit for students so that they can see that they have grown, because sometimes they're in the middle of it. They might not take that pause and be like, wait a minute, 2 days ago, this was really hard. Now it's not so hard. I've learned something, and that's awesome. When you see them making that extra effort and they're starting to take those risks and putting themselves out there, really celebrate and make a big deal of it in a really honest and genuine way, but make a big deal about it. Point those students out to others and say, wow, I can't believe what you've been able to do. And look at this story. I'm so proud of you. Making that a part of celebrating the successes of the one or the two or the three students will begin a snowball effect in your classroom of allowing others to take those risks so that you can build this community where we are growing our students so that they feel comfortable to take risks, experience failure, share their ideas, and trust yourself and the other students. You know, we've talked about this in other shows, but another way for you to build a community is a community is full of people where you are communicating with one another. So I think it's important for you to model good communication skills. And this might need to be explicitly taught, which hits on many oral language communications strands as well as listening. So we've talked about the IDEA acronym. So if you look at the letters of the word ideas, you have IDEAS, ideas. I for inquire. So students are asking questions of the speaker to build upon a discussion. They can disagree, and part of having a conversation is hearing different viewpoints and understanding that it's okay to sit in that disagreement, that it doesn't necessarily need to be settled where one student is right and one student is wrong, that it's okay to have varying opinions or to just have different theories that we can explore at a later time. E is for expand, where students get to extend the conversation that they are having by asking and digging deeper, asking why. So go bigger, deeper questions and ask why. So they're expanding on the ideas of others. A in the IDEAS acronym is for agree or add on, to show their support to someone's idea, to add something additional to that conversation by offering additional evidence or additional support. And finally, summarizing and clarifying. Now, for many students as you're beginning, this is something you often will do as a teacher, but eventually as this is modeled, you can summarize and clarify by putting what somebody else says and putting it into your own words. And this will often reframe what one student says. If it's reframed by a second student, then perhaps there might be a few students in your classroom that needed that reframing so that they better understand what it is you're talking about. I also think it's important for you to have, as a teacher, high expectations about what that community looks like for your students, that you expect them to achieve at their full potential, that you are going to establish criteria that allows them to succeed, and that they can meet those expectations. Those expectations might be different for different students, but I think it's really important that you have a culture of high expectations where you want students to be achieving their full potential. Now, a cautionary tale is to be very careful and watch out for those students that are very concrete thinkers and think in terms of black and white thinking, especially when you might have things like disagreement or there is only one right and one wrong answer. Those concrete thinkers often have a hard time with this, and they might need additional extra support to help move them through and understanding that it is okay, that sometimes there's gray area, that you can sit in that disagreement zone, that not all questions need to have answers, and some questions don't have right answers. So giving those students a bit of extra support and recognizing when you have one of those students and having those discussions over and over with them to get them to understand that there is a gray area, so that they're not constantly shutting down other students during a discussion, because sometimes when they think there's a right or wrong answer, they have a hard time with focusing on the process or being able to look at different opinions. Finally, it's building trust. So this comes down to your routines and rules. And this isn't necessarily talking about communication, but if you want people to trust you, if you want your students to trust you, you have to mean what you say and say what you mean. So if you have a rule in your classroom, you need to be consistent. You need to consistently apply the rules to all students. If you say you're going to do something, you need to be able to do it. And if you're not able to do it, you need to be honest about what's happening and why you're not able to do it. being really transparent with your students definitely helps to build trust with them. So those are my 10 tips, but I do have a bonus. And my bonus is for you to share your own learning. So if you share your learning process and you talk about yourself as a learner and you share your ideas about how you communicate, how you learn, things that you might struggle with as a learner, it helps your students feel relatable and connected to you because they are struggling too. So when you talk about how your brain works or how you think your brain works, I always find that this makes it okay for my students to also acknowledge that their brain might be different from somebody else's. And sharing those stories, I think, are really important because it helps to build trust with your students so that they can learn to know you and like you and trust you, which will help build a community of learners where students feel safe to share with each other, safe to share with you. They can take risks and experience some mistakes and failure along their learning journey. So I hope that this has given you some ideas of how to build a community in your classroom. And I hope that this is something that you can do and see its benefits for inquiry going forward. So that's all we have for tonight. And if you would like to take this show with you on the go, please head on over to iTunes and find the Teaching with Inquiry podcast. You can also find the links to that on www.teachingwithinquiry.com. And I would love it if you could leave a review on the show there for me. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you next Monday where we are back talking about more things inquiry, and I hope to see you there. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.